Hey everyone, this is Iliyas, and this is the very first episode of Directly to You, a podcast where we connect you with people from different industries across the world. So stay tuned. So I'm very glad to introduce you to this guest, Mr. Ajay Shankar Wadhwa. Now I know him personally since a couple of years, and I've spent a lot of time with him. His parents were from the service industry and the defense and railways. He has done his schooling from Patna, Lucknow, Bombay, so he's been all over India. He did his graduation from IIT-B. He passed out in mechanical engineering, and he spent the majority of his experiences from the bearing industry. And he spent 2 decades in India and 2 decades in US. And Uncle, I'm very glad to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you.
How have you been?
Life is great.
Life.
Yes.
All right. So, Uncle, I'll just ask you, just for the viewers, I'll ask you one question. Like, what are bearings? Since you've been in this industry for about almost 40 years, people would like to know that what is this component that is bearings?
Yeah, so basically it all man first when wheel was invented, it was a great invention. Okay, so wheel in itself is a bearing, okay, because it keeps rolling. And then they got it down, they got the bearing inside the wheel. Okay, so wheels have been around for a long time. Okay, and similarly, bearings, they have found some ships where they handle the rudder with bearings on them. So this is all history. Bearings have made massive progress. I mean, both from a technological point of view, etc., etc. And I mean, one of the things around bearings is that since it's so inside a product, people are not even aware of bearings.
Yeah, that's true.
And since it's so technically engineered, you don't, especially the general user who are in cars and all, don't experience bearing failures.
Got it. And what you said was very correct. A lot of my friends do not know what bearings are, even when it's used all across their lives.
Yes.
But they have never seen one bearing.
Yeah. And in the past, today, the watches have gone electronics.
Yeah.
But in the past, there were bearings inside the watches even.
Inside the watches also?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, so.
Oh, that is interesting. And Uncle, you were in this company called SKF. So could you give me a background of what SKF was and how it came to be?
So bearings existed before even SKF came around. And some of the bearings were already well in place, which you see in the industry. But what SKF became famous with was around a bearing called a self-aligning bearing. The previous bearings could not align themselves in case the shaft was bending or your assembly was not done correctly. So there's this Swedish engineer who was to be in a textile mill. And in the textile mill in India, similar part transmissions exist that you see a big industry, a big engine, and then there's a shaft going across. And people are using belts to take power from them. And that shaft used to bend and the bearings would fail. So this guy thought about, why can't I have the bearing aligning itself? So he then came up and sketched this self-aligning ball bearing. And then with that invention, because he patented it, SKF hasn't looked back.
All right. Yeah, it's one of the MNCs, one of the giants in the industry of bearings. Whenever someone thinks about bearings, they automatically assume the brand SKF.
Yes.
It's sort of like this Colgate toothpaste kind of a thing where SKF means bearings and bearings mean SKF.
True.
So, Uncle, I'll just ask you some questions about SKF itself. Like you were associated with SKF for like almost 40 years, I would say.
Yeah.
So how did you come to SKF? Tell us about some of your journey in terms of from college itself. I when I was talking to you, you were saying that you came to St. Xavier's first, and then you went to IIT.
So, yeah, so, that was a very interesting part because in those days you got out of your guys were doing inter, and some people were doing what is called senior Cambridge. So I
Okay.
came out from senior Cambridge and sat for the competitive exams which were there. So, like, there was the marine engineering, there was IIT, etc., etc. But I had to, also apply for colleges.
Okay.
So, since being in Bombay and looking around, St. Xavier's looked the best.
Yeah.
And we all know the reason why it
Yeah.
looked the best. So, I'd applied there. In fact, I even paid my deposit there.
Okay.
And then the results started rolling in of all these exams that I had sat for. And I don't know, people didn't expect me to be in getting to the rankings of IIT,
Okay.
but I did. I mean, it's surprisingly that my family was surprised more than I was.
Okay.
Yeah, because I had put in the hard work.
Yeah.
So yeah, I got into IIT. Then I had to take out my deposit from St. Xavier's, but
All right.
I was technically there for 2 days.
Okay. So, but I hope that in those 2 days you enjoyed it.
Yes, yes. Well, not much education, but very pleasing to the eye.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. St. Xavier's Bombay is like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Even I dropped out of engineering, by the way, and I gave my competitive exams, but the ranking which came in was the number of my rank was huge. So my parents thought it was a phone number that had come in. So it was sort of like that, and after that, I after the first year of engineering, I dropped out. So I got into BCom and sort of got into this family business, which is about bearings. So this topic of bearings, I know it because my family business is into it. And after that, I think after your college, straight away did you get into sort of this technical education and
Yeah, so in those days, let me tell you, college was referred to as, where you did your bachelor's or, the other stuff. And institutes were called different. So yes, after getting out of the IIT out, there was a brief stint I did with a company which made furnaces.
okay,
And it was very educative for me I was I was a IIT graduate.
right,
So my bosses just handed me over a project and they
okay,
thought I will do everything.
yeah,
And the interesting part of this project was it was up in Chennai.
oh,
And in Chennai, I was putting up a whole heat treatment line for Ashok Leylands for their gears.
all right,
Yeah. So first landing up there and having an Ashok Leland and hitting the hierarchy because they thought out there they thought why did they send a baby here? It was difficult, and then one strange thing happened. I'd taken a break for about 2 weeks or so,
okay,
and I was obviously hitting the Chennai beaches.
I'm
So
sure they
there,
were good.
so there I grew my beard. And
Okay,
when I came back to the Ashok Leland,
yeah, yeah,
there was a sudden change in the respect level.
yeah. I'm sure they must have been
So
like,
it was my beard, not my knowledge.
okay, wow, that's amazing because in furnaces that's a whole different ball game. I'm sure apart from the bearing line, furnaces also might be using bearings.
Lots of that.
Lots of bearings. All right. Then after your furnace industry, you went straight into
Yeah, straight
change jobs into
into SKF.
SKF. So how was working in SKF and what were some of the teams that you were a part of?
Okay, so what really happened here was that I moved from a Indian working culture company and I moved into SKF. And one other thing which I noticed vast was that what an MNC was. And where MNCs, there are many MNCs around, but what was really, really outstanding about SKF is that it's a Swedish company and they are very, very conscious about their image and that they want to be, they will be correct and they're always correct in the way how they behave with employees and
Right.
stuff like that. So that's a big, big thing which I find generally a lot of companies are missing.
Right.
So the question about what about SKF? So the previous firm where I came from, it I had to go looking for information which the company would benefit from. But working with SKF,
Right.
they had so much information. It was amazing. But then I saw a culture part that whoever had the information kept it to themselves.
Yeah, like the Indian
Yeah,
ones.
so then I had to talk to my boss because I said we need to centralize it. And one of the few companies which in its information, like you have a library index
Right.
system,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
SKF has that already.
Right.
It had it from way back. So the information which they were publishing was already structured.
Got it. And even for a guy like me, I'm not a technical guy, I'm more of a commercial guy in terms of the bearing business. So whenever I have to search about any technicalities of a bearing, I go into an SKF website.
Yeah.
So and I completely understand the library of information that SKF has. And I think that was one of the pioneers of putting information out.
It put information out and it had a structure behind it.
All right.
That structure was needed because today you sit in a very computerized world.
Yes.
So there are enough search engines around it.
Right.
But in those days, if there was a topic, there was an index out there. You looked to the index, and suppose you wanted bearings for rolling mills, then you would go for, in the production side, it would go into rolling mills,
Okay.
and it had information all of different types of rolling mills. It even had how to calculate. So
Okay.
it was a really, really amazing experience.
And SKF did this first, I believe, because
Way.
no other company did this way back in the day.
So there may have been others which I don't know of,
Right.
but yes, they were one of the companies where I walked into a very structured information system.
Got it. And Uncle, what were some of the teams that you were part of when you joined in? And
So I, coming from IIT, obviously I was absorbed in the technical side.
right.
So you hear about guys, they call themselves application engineering.
Yes.
So I was appointed as in the application engineering area.
Okay.
Okay, so now just to explain to some people that application engineering, it's very common now that they in SKF they push you towards knowing what the customer's application is.
Right.
So, and especially application related to bearings.
Bearings. Okay.
So, in that whole information system, the terminologies they used, so if you went to a rolling mill guy, you were well aware of the terminologies they were using.
All right.
So, it's not only that they tell you what the purpose of your bearing is, but you also relate to them.
Okay. So that helps in sales also.
Yeah, it is. So we were like the backup end of the sales because,
Got it.
okay, so now you asked my one experience there as I was referring to, everyone kept all the engineering information
To
with them.
themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I had to talk to the boss and say, no, this has to be centralized.
Right.
And then I created this huge library.
That we see today.
Yeah, you see today. But now it's all gone electronic. So
Okay.
it's the media is different.
Right.
Yeah, so
Okay.
there was a lot of internal reluctance. And if the boss asked some other guy do this, their first excuse was, but I don't have the information.
I don't have the information. Yeah,
Yeah.
that is the
That is
standard
standard
answer.
question. Yeah.
So, Uncle, was it difficult to find good engineers back in India during those days?
So we have to get around the word called what is engineering, you know. So so first of all, you found very good, capable people. Okay, so
Okay.
they were well prepared for the industry, and they could communicate. All the skill sets were there.
Okay.
But engineer for me is a person who wants to be an engineer. Okay, there are a lot of people who have done engineering, okay, but actually have also been trained for analytical skills.
Right.
When you do engineering, you're actually being trained for analytical skills.
Absolutely.
Okay, so you got these skill sets now. Any industry will pick you up because you have analysis. So banking will take you away,
Right.
finance guys will take you away because you got this whole thing of analyzing issues,
Issues
data.
and problem solving abilities.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and so even when I took engineers and trained them, I noticed that out of the, say, 8 or 9 of them, I would just get 1 or 2 good engineers. Good engineers means who want to be engineers,
Want to be, not for the namesake.
not for the names.
Because in India, India being a powerhouse of the volume that engineers that it produces,
Yeah.
do you think that it should focus more on quality now? Because most of the engineers in India are not being hired by any company. So I think there's a problem in the Indian education system or the engineering side of it where students don't want to learn
So
that analytical side.
first, I would question the so-called the engineering which the institutes are training out there.
Okay.
They're not training. They're not engineers.
Okay.
By their nature, they're not engineers.
Okay.
Okay,
So that's a big problem
it's a big
because
problem.
they're just churning out
They're
engineers.
just churning out engineers.
Okay.
Okay, they give them a title
And a degree.
and a degree.
Okay.
So for me, what happens is that if I hire a B.Tech, okay, for me, an engineer means he should gravitate to the machines, he should gravitate to. So if you tell the engineer that you go help the guy who's saying doing molding work, okay, then I would tell him that you, when the molding product comes out, you handle it for the molding guy.
Okay.
Okay, and that guy would get upset with me because he said, I'm a B.Tech.
Yeah.
This is not my job.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. So what I'm saying, what I'm trying to put forth, trying to find a good engineer is a little, it's a little difficult.
Difficult.
And
And yeah.
yeah, and the other big skill set which I spot in engineers is how observant they are.
I think that's the same with doctors also, that how observant you are.
How you connect 2 points.
Okay.
You
Got
see something and you connect that this could be.
right.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Uncle, what would be a couple of more qualities, the absolute qualities other than observant, that you look for when you hired engineers back in the day? Like you said, out of 10 people, you maybe took 1 or 2 engineers. So other than being an observant guy, what would be the other things that you looked for?
I look for like the guy is an engineer, and when he would come, I would look around to see is his eyes focusing on me, or is his eyes roaming around and seeing what is around me.
All right.
Remember I told you the observance skills?
Yes.
Yeah, that's it. So
Okay.
you know
Yeah.
what is he processing.
Okay.
Then obviously the normal skill sets, how are they communicating, how is he connecting, all that is there. So engineers also have to learn to listen more.
Okay. And what you said was very true, Uncle, when you sort of pushed those engineers to go to the engineering or technical department. So I totally understand this because when you move a person from an office to the grassroots level of the technicalities, they're like, okay, why did you send me? I'm a B.Tech guy. But that BTech guy's job is to go into that machine side.
Correct. Yeah. So and there's so for me, for him to handle that product, like I was relating,
Yeah.
because I wanted him to come back to tell me and tell me how many faults were on the product.
Okay. So you wanted him to like
Yeah,
tell you.
yeah. Because if he didn't handle the product coming out live from the machine,
Right.
and he has to say clean it, he should be observant enough to see the defects.
Okay.
So there's a lot.
So, Uncle, on coming to the now we've discussed about the technical side. Now coming to the supply chain side of the bearings. Okay. Have you introduced or like have you wanted to introduce two things or have you already introduced two things in the supply chain that you would like to tell, and why did you change in your company the supply chain side of the bearings?
So I'll give you an example. We are very unconnected as to how the customer wants the product.
Okay.
Okay, so like we had, say, like we had a product and a big truck manufacturing company. Okay, we are delivering the product to him.
Okay.
So we produce it, and we don't want to be. So what we do is that we are producing that part. We want it for, let's say, the service market, and we also want it to go to the customer.
Okay.
Okay. So do we pack it for the customer or the service market?
Okay. So the packaging is different
Yeah,
for
so
that.
you said supply chain. So now how do I deliver? Do I deliver the bearings in just single packets, or do I give him in say a box? So he has 10 of them.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So
So
I think when you change the packaging, you
yeah,
make it
so the packaging, what you call today bulk packing.
bulk packing. Okay.
Yeah. And then
All
you
right.
have to pay attention enough, because if that product is going into a wheel,
Yeah.
so the wheel is assembled in two areas.
Okay.
So the part which goes onto the wheel shaft
Yeah.
is in a different area. Where it goes into the actual wheel is a different area.
Okay. But are those the same bearings or are they different bearings?
No, same bearing with the inner ring and an outer ring.
Okay.
So
All right.
do you give a set of outer rings for the different department, and do you give the set of inner rings for the different department?
Okay. So even for those, were the packaging different?
You have to make it. No, you have to get the factory has to produce it and pack it in that manner.
Okay. All right. So Escape did that.
We started that.
Oh, you started that. Okay.
Yeah, but then now it comes is that usually when they assemble a bearing, some guy okays it that this inner ring, this outer ring is one set. But now you have separated them and you're sending the parts to the different area. When those guys actually come back and fit together, do they match up?
Okay.
So yeah, now I'm getting too deep into technical. So
No, that's all right. Because learning the technical side of it is amazing, because when you go to a customer and you explain him the technicalities, so he's like, you know your stuff.
Yes.
Otherwise, bearings is such a industry where it's mostly driven by the nomenclature of the models.
That's the start.
That's a start. Okay. So I'll just explain to the viewers, and Uncle, I think you are the best one to explain to the viewers about the nomenclature of the bearings and the standardization.
Yeah. So it's amazing. First, I thought, why did SKF standardize the parts?
Right.
Okay. So, like, if you go out into the bearing world, you will hear of a nomenclature, and the nomenclature tells a lot of what the bearing is about. If a bearing number starts with a 6,
Yeah.
okay, generally it means a deep groove ball bearing.
Right.
If you take the last two digits of the bearing number, multiplied by 5, it will tell you the ID of the shaft size,
The inner diameter of the shaft.
the diameter of the shaft.
Okay. Sorry, the diameter of the shaft.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, nomenclature, but the beauty part is that when they standardized it, the volumes of consumption in the world increased.
Okay, so many people like a lot of people started to know what that nomenclature was and what bearing would fit into their sort of product. So that's why the consumerism started.
Yeah, so they had standards and they knew that if they go out, and then also what happened is, suppose one industry couldn't give them that bearing
Yeah.
because it was standardized.
Right.
They could use another.
Another bearing. Okay.
Yeah.
So the volume started shooting up.
It just started, yeah.
Got it. Wow, that is interesting.
So this is all now. It's an engineering side, but that's what you asked me a question centered around supply chain.
Yeah.
So if supply chain, I gave you one aspect of engineering, which helps like how we deliver the inner ring, outer ring coming together into one.
Yeah.
Now, supply chain also is the volume throughput.
Volume through?
Throughput. So if we increase the volume
Yeah.
of the use,
Yeah.
now people don't connect that little standardization helped in the volume side.
All right. So I think there was one aspect where a lot of industries, when Escape started with the bearing factories, it started in Europe.
Yes.
In Europe, and then it came to like other countries. They started setting up their factories in India, uh, all the Southeastern Asian countries. So why did they start? Why did they not start in like say suppose China or somewhere in the 1960s, 40s? Like why did they choose Europe itself? Like all over Europe, they had their factories.
So one of the reasons is that those countries weren't really industrialized in the true sense.
Okay.
You don't hear of Chinese cars from those years.
Yeah, in 1940s there were no Chinese cars because Industrial Revolution started in England, I think. Okay.
Yeah, that's what they say. Yes.
They say, okay. So Escape put their factories in Escape. Sorry, the better way to put it is Escape had their factories in Europe, in Sweden, in France, Germany. So were they ever impacted during the world wars?
Yeah, there's a lot of history around that. Yes, they were impacted because during the World War, what really happened, you had to take sides.
Right, the Allied and the Axis powers.
Whatever it was.
Right.
You had to be either this side or you're that side.
That's okay.
Because if you stood in the middle, you got shot. So, so you had to take sides.
Okay.
And then the amazing part is, as I was telling you earlier, that the bearing is actually so deeply buried inside the equipment.
Right.
In fact, if you don't have the bearing, you can't start assembly.
Okay, so that was a critical component in the military equipment.
Everywhere.
Everywhere. Right.
Whether it was a truck or whether it was a gun,
Okay.
but you couldn't start the assembly of that.
Yeah, without a bearing.
Without a bearing. So if you have to really bring a country down,
yeah,
just kill their bearing supply.
Okay, kill their bearing supply and you can bring a country down.
They won't be able to.
Okay. So were there stories of, I heard there were stories of the Allied and Axis powers bombing each other's bearing factories.
Yeah. So you attack their fuel supplies, you attack. Yeah. But I think a smarter way is to attack the production. Actually target the core product of the gun.
Got it. So I'm sure the bearing factories were being bombed left and right during the war.
So suppose they did it to the US side.
Yeah.
And they bombed the aircraft bearing side.
Okay.
The other guy couldn't come across to bomb even.
Right. Because they couldn't assemble the parts manufactured for aircrafts and they couldn't. Okay. Wow. That's a particularly interesting story.
Yeah.
Because we always heard about institutions or the factories, but bearing factories were such a critical component of the other side's military equipment that you never hear stories of. Okay, they were actually bombing their bearing factories so that they could never rise up.
Yeah, they couldn't produce more.
They couldn't produce more, right? So, Uncle, tell us about one interesting story about SKF. I am sure you must have a lot of stories about SKF and your time over there. But as a company, I'm sure you must have learned or known about those inner things that we don't know as an audience.
Okay. So it something happened even before I joined SKF.
Okay.
Remember, I was telling you that story about around how SKF was formed.
Yeah.
I told you about this Swedish engineer who was in a textile mill, so he invented that self-aligning ball bearing. Now that self-aligning ball bearing, SKF, as I said, never looked back, and they went world over. So before the wherever that ball bearing was made, SKF also made a ball bearing just as a ball bearing. It had it's called a deep groove ball bearing. Now, in those days, there was a challenge around that type of a bearing to get to fit more balls into the bearing. It's not so easy to assemble the bearing. So SKF actually made one where there was a filling slot. That means one side of the bearing, there was a notch cut so you could actually uh, fill more balls into it. And so they made that bearing. And I think we are relating back to somewhere around 1920s or somewhere there, maybe 25.
Wow, almost
And
100 years.
so, but compared to the self-aligning ball bearing, now this is my spin on the story, okay? Compared to the self-aligning ball bearing, it wasn't that sophisticated. So, and SKF didn't want to be associated with that bearing, so they tried putting it as another brand and they wanted to separate it from the company. So, yes, they did that, okay, and that ball bearing then became into another brand and they separated the company. When they separated that company, the guy who ran that company didn't concentrate that much on to expand it and take it to other factories. What he did was that around the bearing, he started making more stuff. So I don't know whether he made little electrical generators or something around it, but he did, and he really expanded it fast, very aggressively. So that particular unit of SKF went on to make auxiliaries for cars. Then they made cars, and then they even went on to build aircraft engines.
Wow.
Okay, and that company, not many don't associate it. That company was called Volvo.
Whoa.
Okay, so Volvo actually is the name of a bearing.
Okay.
It means to roll on.
So the name Volvo means,
Yeah.
all right.
And then there's a little spin on my story. There is my spin that Volvo then had to pay royalty to SKF for using that name.
Because SKF owned the trademark of Volvo.
Volvo.
Wow, that's pretty interesting. A
Yeah.
company that right now currently makes automobiles, aircraft engines, was a part of
Aircraft
SKF.
they've stopped now.
Aircraft they stopped. Okay, but it used to be a part of SKF,
Yes.
and it came from that bearing brand and then expanded into such a big company. That was very interesting. I never understood. Like I never knew that it was Volvo. That would have been the end part of the story. That is interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there are lots of stories like this. So. Yeah, but you have to be curious to find them. Okay.
I'll definitely search about this and get into more details because I was not very much interested on the brand on the cars or automobiles, but I was very much interested about brands and how they have come from ideation to like execution. So I'll definitely check out Volvo's story.
And a lot of people, when you talk now about Volvo, they associate it with aircrafts because the way their dashboard was,
Yeah.
they're more focused for the drivers, like how aircrafts are.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a lot of similarity.
All right. So, Uncle, there was another country during that same time, Japan, after the World War, I think in the 1940s, after they were defeated by the Allied powers, I think by US, Great Britain, and Russia, that was starting to manufacture a lot of goods. So, can you just explain like what kind of goods they targeted and how quickly Japan's industry took on?
So first thing first, Japan, as the culture of the people, they're very disciplined. It's amazing the level they're disciplined to.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, and the discipline is more important. To give you an example, if in their industry, if they want to have a strike, okay, they won't stop work. Okay, it's not because for them they're too proud that they're not working. What they would do to really affect the company, they will overproduce. The workers will overproduce.
Wow.
So what happens is that if you hear of terminologies just in time and things like that, it's actually Japanese culture. So with just producing things right on time, they can cut back a lot of the inventory because
Okay.
even anything delivered to their factory is just in time. Okay, so if you walk around any factory, you will see a lot of product waiting.
Yeah.
Okay, so and they believe in it, and I also believe this just in time is the correct. But if that Japanese as a company, they want to tell the management, no, you're not listening to us, they will produce more. So they totally disrupt the back channels.
Okay, so instead of like going on a strike and not doing any work, they do the opposite. They produce more so that the management has to, the management gets into trouble and they are like left with stocks and
Not left with stock. They've finished everything, then they can stop working.
okay, okay.
Okay.
Wow, that is
It's
very
a
interesting.
positive way of doing it.
Positive way of doing it, right? And I think I've heard this story. I'm not sure whether it's just social media hoax, but when workers and drivers and the union people who are on strike, especially in the transportation industry in Japan, they don't stop the buses. They just don't collect the revenue for the tickets. They don't get the money for the tickets from the
Whatever,
passengers.
yeah.
So that
It's a huge
that's
focus.
a huge expense to the government because
Okay.
then they have to like
Yeah. So
continue.
so that's what I was trying to emphasize. The Japanese people, they wanted to get their industry back. So what they did was because there were a lot of entrepreneurs in there, so they started producing things.
Right.
But one aspect they didn't focus on was quality. So
Okay.
in those days, there was a time like you hear of China products coming in very cheap.
Yeah.
So Japan was known in the world for that.
So Japan was that Japan had
What
that
kind?
image of China before
Yes.
China came in. Okay.
Okay.
So how did they go from producing cheap quality stuff to high
That's what I
quality?
said now. They're very disciplined people. If you see their culture, like even the food they eat,
Right.
it has to be just correct.
Just correct.
So they couldn't live too long with cheap stuff. So if you hear about gurus in
Yeah.
quality,
Yeah.
if suppose there are 8 gurus in quality or 10 gurus in quality, you will notice 5 names of gurus who were Japanese
Japanese gurus in quality.
quality
So
and well known.
okay, so
Is
they
not
pioneered the quality management of
yeah
factories and
the
products.
philosophy, quality, the actual.
All right.
Okay, now and if you notice, then you will notice that out of the 10, suppose 5 were Japanese,
Yeah.
3, 4 would be American.
Would be American.
Yeah,
Okay.
and 1 or 2 coming out from Europe or say.
All right. I know about one guy, which I think you also know of, William Deming.
Yeah, Deming. So he
Deming.
was American.
He was American.
Yeah,
Okay.
but they weren't listening to him in America.
Okay, so he
So
wasn't respected in America.
no, he felt, and so he upped and he went to Japan
Oh, okay.
Okay.
So Deming went to Japan.
and became famous.
Wow.
And he is a big role player vis-a-vis cars and all that. So today, if you hear of a good quality car, would
Yeah.
you say Toyota is in one of those brackets?
Yeah.
Okay, so Deming worked there. But Toyota was also very lucky to have 1 or 2 of those gurus there.
Right.
Okay,
And there
so
was another guy I've heard, Taguchi.
Taguchi.
Taguchi
Beautiful
was from-
philosophy.
Okay.
So it's his philosophy. I don't have the exact word. He says the quality of the product should be judged by the amount of bad design they have.
Okay. The quality of the product should be judged on the amount of bad design they have.
Yeah, not the good one.
Not the good one. Wow, that is a pretty good perspective. I've never heard of it.
Yeah,
But
because that is the burden you leave the
consumers with.
yeah.
Okay. Wow. So, Uncle, explain to us, what did Japan produce like in those times after World War? The economy was shattered. So what were the products
since we're
they
talking,
focused into?
so since let me connect you Japan with SKF. So they targeted four industries.
Right.
They targeted cameras, they targeted calculators,
Okay.
and they targeted watches,
Watches. Okay.
and they targeted bearings.
Bearings. Okay. So
They want
cameras, watches, and calculators and bearings.
bearings.
Okay.
And they wanted to dominate the world.
Right.
Okay. So if you notice, the Swiss watches died.
They died.
They died. They've come back now. The brands have come back.
Okay, but the manufacturers
They
were
died because
okay.
Japan went and they changed the whole concept of the movement system. And
Right.
so
I think Seiko was one of the
Yeah,
brands that smashed the
everyone.
Swiss industry.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So now our guys can also relate to the cameras. Even Canon and all, they smashed the camera industry from Europe. Okay. Then even the calculators, the watches,
Yeah,
calculator,
Casio.
Casio, really, they tried bearings and SKF woke up. So SKF would be producing, like it was came out that SKF went to so many countries, and in each country they would be making a bearing called 6204 or something.
Right.
Okay. So SKF put its foot down, and it only allowed one country to produce one bearing,
Okay.
one size or one type.
So that would produce in mass,
Mass.
and the cost would go down.
Cost would go down, the quality went up.
Right.
So most they produced in one or two countries,
Okay.
unless the laws were against it, or something like that. So they were never able to beat SKF on that ground.
Right.
But they had put so much effort. So when you talk about good bearings,
Right.
if you take names, you will hear about, say, one from America.
Right.
You will hear about two or three from Europe.
Yeah.
And you'll get about 4, 5, 6 from Japan.
Japan. Right. Because so SKF, some guy in SKF had that vision to see that, okay, Japan is doing this. I'm not going to let them enter Europe like this and smash our industries. So he said to everyone, okay, listen, we are going to produce 2 or 3 bearings in one factory, and maybe that same model in maybe maximum 2 factories. So the volume went up. They focused on the quality of that model, and the cost went down.
Yes. So they had to attack from both. But just producing volume is not going to stop the Japanese.
Right. Because of the quality also.
Yeah, no, they had the gurus there. No?
Oh yeah, all the quality management gurus were from Japan.
Yeah.
All right. Wow, that is pretty interesting. I never understood how Japan got into manufacturing, because it's a very small country. It's not like a very big country like in terms of land mass like China, Japan, India, but the amount of products that they produced were good in quality.
As I told you, it was their discipline.
Discipline, right. All right.
Okay. So now it's not that bearing was one part,
Yeah.
but most of the bearings actually go into automotive.
In the cars.
Yeah. So give me 2 good quality or 3 good quality guys in cars and tell me what do you know about their motorcycle, which are known brands. So you got
Toyota, Honda, BMW, obviously German.
So
Right.
they took the volume away from America.
Right. And even now, right now, the most competition that any country has in its automobile industry is from Japan.
What's it?
So Japanese cars are reviewed as a brand which deliver quality.
And they want so you hear Chinese, but they are subsidized a little bit.
Okay.
Bikes,
Bikes, I think
Suzuki,
yeah, Suzuki,
Yamahas.
Yamaha. Okay, wow.
So they're all there.
All Japan, and all Japanese
And
ones.
where do bearings go most? Into
In cars, bikes. Okay.
No.
All right.
Okay.
Wow. That is pretty interesting. So, Uncle, thank you so much for this podcast. And it was lovely having you over here. And was even lovely to know about your experiences. And thank you for sharing all those stories with us. I'm sure our viewers would have been educated even a little bit. And I'm sure the viewers liked those stories and they learned something new, because these stories have never come out, I'm sure. And not many people know about the stories from Japan, from Europe. So thank you for sharing those stories with us. And we'll wrap up this podcast.
Yeah, and I would like just to add one thing is because I would love to, because people I know, they know me as a person who doesn't talk too much.
Yeah, and thank God that I made it into the opposite side.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Uncle.
They'll be very surprised with this.